But I did want to start out by reminding the listeners a little bit about your story. And I feel like when we heard your story the first time, we kind of cut to the part where you just weren't feeling that well. And I wanted to go back a little bit about your upbringing and capture a little bit more about your story, going back to the beginning and maybe some of the root causes to, what you felt was, you're obviously very fit. You accomplished a lot as far as fitness goes, but your health seemed to struggle a lot. So I wondered if we could capture that story today.
Yeah, I mean, I've just worked out, hence being a little bit glowing at the moment. I think this is the thing. If I was to go back to when I was 25 and very, very fit and eating lots of carbohydrates, I wouldn't believe me. And I can remember flicking through a bodybuilding magazine. I mean, I have done a bodybuilding tournament, completely natural, by the way. Hence, I wasn't big and bulky like a bag of walnuts. But, and I can remember even then they would talk about maybe try a high fat diet. And I just ignored it completely and utterly. I didn't take any notice. But I suppose you can get your little violins out now because my mum died of colon cancer. My dad died and my girlfriend died. Now, that was in my 20s. And my mother, she basically made the decisions for food, and we followed the food guidelines to a T. So when they came in 1977, I mean, literally, I didn't touch red meat. I was born 1964, so I'm 60 now. And, I didn't have red meat. I didn't have saturated fat in anything. I was eating sort of porridge oats, which the Americans call oatmeal, lots of fruits, lots of veg, and so was she. That's very important. Bran, we've got a cereal called Bran Flakes, and it was loads and loads of fiber. She died of colon cancer. So all the things allegedly that are great and stop you getting colon cancer, she did, and she got colon cancer. And she didn't do any of the things that give you colon cancer allegedly, like red meat, saturated fat, all that. So yeah, when she died, I'd already lost my dad, and then I lost a girlfriend to breast cancer. I didn't think nutrition had anything to do with it. I now realize that, if I knew then what I know now, maybe things would have turned out differently. And I had bits and pieces that were going wrong, although I was really quite athletic and doing well at sport and great at squash and, all to a good standard. I did have aches and pains, even in my 20s, and then I had a very severe back pain on a squash court, and I was taken off sort of on a hard board. And I can remember the two paramedics. One had back pain and he was very sympathetic, and the other person never had back pain, didn't know, just thought I was being, in those days you could say this, oh, just being a big girl, man up and all this sort of stuff. So I went to hospital and I was shown a very convincing x-ray and told by the time I'm 50, I've been in a wheelchair. That was it, categoric. Of course, I'm 60 now. I still play five-side soccer, although maybe I play like I'm in a wheelchair. But, I've never seen a wheelchair. I've not been in a wheelchair. That didn't happen. But I was very convinced. And I suppose now I'm looking at how people come to me and they still believe what their doctor tells them, how compelling it can be. Because I've lived that. I was told that. I was shown x-rays that this is your hip. This is it. You can't do this. And that was, fast forward. I know you want my story, but I'll just keep that thread going. I can remember in my 40s, before I became an obesity and diabetes specialist practitioner, I was told that, diabetes is chronic and progressive. So you believe that. You absolutely believe it. And I was still an advanced personal trainer at the time, and I was going to train someone that wanted to get to the Olympics who was a type 1 diabetic. And that's when my sort of qualifications in this field started in earnest, really. So through my 20s and 30s and early 40s, I did literally outrun a bad diet. I looked great. I felt okay. Now I look back, I didn't feel okay. There were things that were wrong. There was athlete's foot. There was, my skin was terrible. My forehead was terrible. I mean, this is 60-year-old skin, 10 years low carb keto. It's much, much better now. My teeth were ruined from having a high carb diet, absolutely ruined, and so anyway, when I got to in my 40s and I was doing middle distance running, hence the medals up there, I just thought, well, I'm going to get qualified. I'm going to learn all this stuff. And that's also when the bloods came in, because once I started to learn about this stuff and I started to do the rehab clinics, I was getting nowhere with people that were following my advice, which was, the mainstream advice, dietetics, the dietitian's advice of 6 meals or 3 meals, 3 snacks, keep your blood glucose up, all that rubbish. And people weren't getting anywhere. So I was in my 40s. I was all newly qualified. I was thinking I was doing great. And yet the people that were doing really well, which was maybe 1 in 10, were coming in and I was saying, wow, what are you doing? And they all say to a person, we're ignoring you. That's what was happening. And of course, it wasn't carnivore then. It was Atkins, or it was, low carb. They didn't say keto, or they just said they're dropping the carbohydrates, eating more meat, whatever. And it took me, and I'm really embarrassed to say this, about 5 years to actually realize that I'd got it all wrong. But I did. I realized. And this is what annoys me about so many influencers out there. I won't name drop, but everybody knows who they are. They're constantly, on the case of carnivore, defending things like statins and lowering your LDL and absolutely ridiculous advice, because they haven't got it in them to say, do you know what? There's too much proof that maybe we're slightly wrong. So that really frustrates me. I won't rant about that too much. So when I got to my 50s, I started low carb, and for my own personal journey and also for the people I was seeing, it was life-changing, absolutely life-changing. And all of a sudden, this chronic progressive type 2 diabetes wasn't that. It was a reversible condition. All you had to do was stop eating carbohydrates. I mean, literally, that's it in a nutshell. And to me, it's so obvious. If you are taking your daily blood glucose readings and every time you eat carbohydrates, it puts it through the roof, and therefore it's going to increase your insulin, and then you will have a crash. Then you feel hungry again, and you constantly do that left, right, and center every single day. You're going to have problems with managing blood glucose levels. And the easiest thing to do in the world is to not raise them in the first place. So that was it. Once I realized that we can actually, pass a common sense test, it became relatively easy to talk to people about it. And, there's all this rubbish all around it. We should be eating fruit and veg. Well, why? I mean, 70% of the average person's diet is fruit and veg. Even if it's potatoes, all right, 70% is carbohydrate. That's what it is. And then people say, well, it's not fresh fruit and veg. Well, carnivore has not been popular for a long, long time. Keto hasn't been popular for a long, long time. It doesn't mean it's not the right diet. It's not a fad, but it's not been immensely popular. Low carb hasn't been immensely popular. And yet diseases, heart attacks, diabetes, bipolar disease, mental health have all skyrocketed. Well, it can't be that and colon cancer and things like that, it can't be that the only people with those conditions are carnivores or people following keto, because there's not enough of us. So it must be the people that aren't eating that. And, to me, it just seems ridiculous, because you can stand back and say, well, what's happened? Well, in the since 1977, since the food guidelines came in, since that's happened, we've reduced our intake of butter, we've reduced our intake of red meat and meat in general, and we've increased our carbohydrates, and we've increased our fruit and veg intake, and it's been a disaster. That's an absolute nailed on epidemiological, real world experience. There is way too much diabetes. Now, when I started, diabetes wasn't common. It was unusual. There's still enough people to have a clinic, but I was only having maybe like 10 people a week. And it certainly wasn't kids, and it certainly wasn't people in their 20s, unless it was type 1 diabetes. And now I'd be inundated. I'd be absolutely inundated. And there lies the rub. You see, I was doing it as what's called a GP referral thing. So, I wasn't paid a king's ransom, and it wasn't like if you've got 100 people, you're going to get 100 times as much as one person. But it is a money-making thing if you're selling. And I actually do think we can say selling medications, even if you don't think you're selling medication. The doctors aren't selling medications. They get an honorary. They get the pharmaceutical companies saying, here's a pat on the back. Thank you so much. Your average patient's cholesterol, LDL, has been lowered, and therefore we're rewarding you for good work. It's not commission. It's not payment, but it is. So there's no incentive to get people to do things that cost nothing, like a good diet. And I am actually got to, getting to the point where I think if people really genuinely think that modern medicine is in it to cure you, then they need to wake up. There are There's public record. There's Goldman Sachs telling the pharmaceutical industry it's not a good business model to cure people. You've got to stop doing that. You've got to manage disease. You've got to keep them diseased, so they need the medications. That's public record. That's out there, absolutely out there. And that's not how I work. You know, I had a coaching client this morning, yesterday. You know, this is the last session. You don't need to do this anymore, because that's what your aim is to make them completely not needing to pay any money for anything. And it's so simple. It really is so simple, but it's made complicated, and people in the mainstream don't want to tell you because it's all full of conflicts of interest.